So the dastardly deed was now done. Jesus was now crucified. And Pilate gave them all that they asked for. And I honestly believe he was tormented by this decision. We know history tells us that Pilate ended up killing himself. He committed suicide. I believe he was tormented over all of this. After all, he was convinced that Jesus was innocent. And he said it over and over again. In John 19, verse 4, he says, I find no guilt in him. And it was he that sentenced this innocent man to death. Why? Well, when you boil it all down, to save himself, to save his own skin, to save his job, and to save his own life. And what I believe to be a jab at the chief priests and the scribes that forced his hand to kill Jesus, he had a sign written that said, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Folks, this note that he put on the cross of Jesus Christ was out of spite. It was out of spite. It was a stinging poke in their eye. The Jewish leadership was forced his hand to kill Jesus. He didn't want that, and so the least he could do was poke him in the eye. And that's exactly what they did. And of course, the Jewish leadership was appalled at this public declaration that took place in 3 separate languages, no less: Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Now picture, the cross is on the outside of the city, and on main traffic in and out of the city. And by the way, the Romans did that on purpose. They crucified people on that path because people caught breaking the law would be seen very visibly as a deterrent for anyone trying to go against the Roman government or breaking the law. So if you had a thought about breaking the Roman law, you remembered seeing people hung on a cross going in and out of the city. And that's where Jesus and those 2 criminals were hanging. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. Thousands of people walking by over and over again, seeing this bloody scene. Aramaic was the language of the surrounding area. Latin was the language, the legal language of Rome. And Greek was the language of the land, thanks to Alexander the Great. So you have these 3 languages that are taking place in Jerusalem. And the text says it was read by many Jews. Remember, Jerusalem at this time was swollen with people because of the Passover celebration. So there were thousands of people that have descended on the city. And as you can imagine, and as John tells us, the chief priests were not happy about this sign. They rejected Jesus on every level, especially on the level of him being their king. And not too long ago, if you remember, it wasn't too long ago that they uttered the words that no self-respecting Jew would ever let from their lips. In John chapter 19, verse 15, they said, "We have no king but Caesar." So to get back to Pilate one more time, they throw their political weight around, and they demand that he change the sign from what it says. They said, "We want you to change this sign so it says, 'This man says that I'm the King of the Jews.'" And Pilate had had enough. He was done with their games. He was done with their manipulation. And for an instance, in a very small way, we get to see Pilate find his backbone. We get to see the Pilate that Josephus and Philo wrote about. All of a sudden, I believe, with anger in his eye, he looked at them and said, "What I have written, I have written." He was done. And I think they got the message. So why does John show us this part of the story? It seems like a random bit of history that he throws in this, what I would say is the most important story in human history. Why does he include this? Well, I think it's more than just an interesting, anecdotal, informative sub-bar for us. I think there's a significant spiritual reason for this story. God used a pagan governor who was more concerned about his life and his job. God used that man to share the truth that Jesus Christ was in fact the King of the Jews, and he used him to share that with thousands of people. I think that's a beautiful, ironic thing. Pilate was an unwitting evangelist. He spoke truth to thousands of people who marched by the cross on their way into and out from the city. Listen, God can use whomever he wants to use, whenever he wants to use them, and for whatever purpose he wants to use them. God used a donkey in the Old Testament to hold a prophet back from speaking against him. Jesus said that if they don't speak out on my behalf, the rocks are going to start crying out praise to me and to my God. And God doesn't need us, folks. God can use whatever and whomever he wants to get his plan accomplished. He can use a Roman governor, a pagan Roman governor. He can use a donkey. He can use rocks. He can use whatever he wants to. But do you know what unlikely person he would like you to use within your circle of influence to inform that Jesus is not only the King of the Jews, but the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? Do you know what unlikely person he wants to use? You. He wants to use you. God uses unlikely people to accomplish his plan.